Hey everyone, welcome to Armbars Sidebars, episode number 19, believe it or not. Today we are joined by a star seen and heard in the National Wrestling Alliance prior to his role in the NWA. He was perhaps best known for his time with Ring of Honor. Kyle, sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Dude, that made me laugh. Best known for his time in Ring of Honor. Nobody even knows that was me. I had a different last name. I had hair. I was a failed professional wrestler, and now I am trying my best as a broadcaster as well as a guy who runs a wrestling company. So thank you for having me on. Happy to be here. Excuse the great little environment I'm in. I'm on the road right now traveling, so please don't judge me. At least it's a nice SUV.
Honestly, it's a nice atmosphere and it'll stand out compared to everything else. I wouldn't really put you down that much, but it is a fun fact. I had no idea Kyle Durden and Kyle Davis were the same person until maybe 2 years
I'm,
ago.
I'm telling you, like I've had very few people remember. Like I've had other people that were I used to watch Ring of Honor, and they're like, "Wait, that was you with hair?" I'm like, "Yeah," and I was lighter, and life's different. I'm older now and not wiser.
When I go through research, I go through various different websites, and some like Cage Match will have it both of your names on there, and then some random wikis and stuff, they'll have Kyle Durden, they'll have no reference to what you're doing now because they just don't even realize it's the same person, which is it's great.
I mean, Aaron Stevens, who used to be, Damian Sandow, he actually, I noticed stuff like that online because he's recently in the third season of I Think You Should Leave on Netflix. Great sketch comedy show. But people will be like, is that Mizdow? Is that Damian Sandow? Nobody, it's just one of those things where as you transition into other things, sometimes people don't follow that. So it's not a big
Yeah,
deal. And
and
besides, I
even
was never important. In Ring of Honor, I was a failed wrestler, became a broadcaster, and then when HDNet went out the window, I kind of went into the ether. Thankfully, the NWA found me.
well, we'll definitely get into all of that. But before we do, let people know where to check you out, just so they know, where to find you, and of course, the NWA.
Well, it's super important if you're ever going to get social media to pick a name that's not related to a location because you might move. For example, Instagram and Twitter, I am Kyle Davis ATL. I used to live in Atlanta. So Kyle Davis ATL, I'm not changing it because then I have to change a bunch of other things and tags. And Facebook is just Kyle Davis, but I tend to keep that to just people I know for the most part. National Wrestling Alliance, of course, NWA at NWA on social media. If you want to get merchandise, go to nationalwrestlingalliance.com/shop. If you want to buy tickets, it's NWA Tix, NWATix.com. Otherwise, Google is a wonderful thing.
Plus, guys, we will have links in the description to the social media, to the NWA social media and YouTube page, and there'll be a little graphic at the end of every video, so you can't miss it. Check them out, show
Perfect.
some support, and be sure to subscribe to our channel while you're at it.
Because that YouTube page is super important. That's where all the content is. If you don't hate hearing my voice right now, perhaps you like seeing my face and hearing my voice, you could do that. We have new episodes of NWA programming dropping on our YouTube page currently right now on Tuesdays at 6:05 Eastern. Also, if you want to order one of the pay-per-views, you like something, we just had Crockett Cup happen. Hell of a show, 2-night pay-per-view event. We've got NWA 75 coming up in August and all sorts of things. We'll try to make this evergreen, though.
Absolutely. And this video will be out before then. We normally have a delayed run back time, but it's definitely going to be out before then. So guys, check it out. Buy a ticket. Get your tickets before they're sold out. All right.
Good
So
call.
before we jump right into the beginning, I want to talk to you about something that I asked Joe Galley about, because Joe was nice enough to be our second ever guest. I'm still new to this, but I was very new at that point, and he was kind enough to offer his time. And
My work husband.
one of the first things I asked him was, what is his actual role and title in the NWA beyond just what we see on screen? Because there's so much more that goes into it. So if you could tell us everything you do, which I know it's going to be multiple things, as you were just letting me know, but
So Joe and I both share the COO title, the National Wrestling Alliance, which basically means we are one of 5 people, each of us, that is the office of the company that we all run it. Really, 3 of us work on all the logistical stuff, and one of them is the owner and a rock star and a musician, and Billy Corgan. And then we have talent relations and stuff. So it's really like Joe Galley, myself, and Billy Trask, who is our director and producer, trying to make all these things happen, which right now is a lot of chaotic because there's a summer tour coming out that will have wrestling involved with the Smashing Pumpkins. We recently had that with the World's Vampire Tour in Mexico City as well as Australia. Hell of an experience to be able to travel the world. I'm very thankful for that. Thanks, Billy. I also do on-screen broadcasting, I do interviews, I do ring announcing. If you ever watch our ads, I do the voiceover work. I have to help write that stuff with Joe. Essentially, I'll help with talent relations, logistics, as well as making sure that we can run the shows, booking venues, uh, insurance, making sure that's all set up. I mean, the list, payroll, the list goes on and on. Essentially, if there's something that needs to be done, one of the five of us has to do it, and usually it ends up being Joe or Kyle.
That's great. That's great. And it's funny that you brought up those tours because they will come in, later on. But actually, when we did speak to Joe, and I referenced a lot of past stuff just to try to convince people to go back and watch other videos. So guys, go check that out. But with that, it was the same day they announced the World as a Vampire Tour Mexico show. So it was perfect timing that you brought that up. And you said there's going to be another one coming up. Is that out yet where that's going to be, or is that still under wraps?
Smashing Pumpkins have a tour going around. Tickets are on sale, but the wrestling aspect of it, it looks like it's going to be the mid-August leading into NWA 75s. And then we might do a couple of wrestling aspects of it in September, in early September. Actually, I have to get on a call tomorrow to work out all that logistical aspects of it. But so keep eyes peeled. Follow NWA social media, and we'll hopefully have those dates about when the National Wrestling Alliance will be with the Smashing Pumpkins. And in the coming months, we're also going to be there with Stone Temple Pilots. That'll be cool.
Super cool. Super cool. Okay, so let's go back. I love the generic questions. I grew up, I always say, I'm 31 years old. I grew up in the quote unquote shoot interview era, the kayfabe commentaries, RF videos, all that stuff. I know you're a big fan, so I know you know all about that stuff. When did you first see professional wrestling?
My father took me, I grew up in Connecticut, and at the Harvard Civic Center, there was a WWF show back in the day, and the main event was Hogan versus Big Boss Man in a steel cage. And my father brought me to the show, and I don't remember anything of it other than the fact that I got a really cool neon Hulk Hogan poster, which is funny because I'm not even a Hulk Hogan fan. I liked Hollywood Hogan, but for some reason as a kid, he just was like, oh, hey, I think my dad maybe just assumed I was. And then, of course, as I got older, I fell out of professional wrestling, and I ended up discovering it again on a Saturday morning. My cousin, who's 4 years older than me, JJ, he was super into wrestling, and I remember turning on Superstars on the TV, and it was when Barry Horowitz won his first match ever. And it was the whole thing with the Body Donnas and Hakushi, if I remember properly. And then also during this time, I found ECW. In the middle of the night, because growing up in Connecticut, we had MSG Network, and I believe it was at 2 a.m. Sunday morning, so late Saturday night is when it would appear. And I also remember seeing another memory, my time frames, the older you get, time frames kind of blur, but the first ECW thing I remember seeing was Rey Mysterio Jr., and I think it was Juventud. Could have been Psychosis, but I think it was Ray and Hoovy. It was a Mexican death match, and they were wrestling all throughout the arena. And outside, somebody did a hurricanrana in snow off of the hood of a car. And I was like, what am I watching? This is amazing. And I fell in love with ECW. And that was really the thing that got me back hardcore into wrestling and made me get into that path, which eventually led into the entire reason I broke into wrestling is because I discovered Ring of Honor, because I went to an ECW reunion show in New York City, and Ring of Honor had a show at the Supper Club earlier. So, sometimes your fandom will just bring you to the right places at the right time. And now I work with a bunch of ECW regulars that I used to go to Philadelphia to see at the arena, and it's super cool. And I constantly bug Bat Kenny, who was Simon Diamond, about it all the time, because it's my favorite promotion. And also it's just one of those damn things where it was my developmental time. And now I'm part of the industry and this business and wrestling in general, and I get to work with people that I used to idolize.
That is super cool. And ECW must have been such a culture shock for you, because if you're watching during the Hogan era, the Rock and wrestling and everything like that, then you start falling out of it, and then you come back and you see the gritty ECW. It's just such a different product, and I can see why it would be appealing. Like, I'm guessing, I don't know your age at the time, but I'm guessing you're like a teenager at that point.
I'm 40 now, so I was about 96, 13, 14, right at that developmental age. Period. So the music, the women, Gil McGillicuddy, Francine, just the music and everything else as well, using legit music that we hear on the alternative radio stations. It had a vibe, it had a feeling. It was edited to the MTV generation, which was me. And it just hit on all cylinders. if in fact, I would love to have all the merchandise that I wanted back then. But again, being a kid, not having my own checking account, and at that point in time, anybody listening to this that's of the right age, you'll remember there wasn't an internet really. So it's not like you can go online and order stuff. You had to send a check or money order in with a letter. What the hell? It was a crapshoot. You might never get the thing in the mail.
So who for during the first period and then later on, who were some of your favorites? Because I know you said Hulk Hogan really wasn't, but Hollywood Hogan became one of your favorites. When you first started becoming a fan, and then later, who were the people that you warmed up to the most?
As a kid, I didn't really like younger than that. When you're a child, I didn't have favorites or anything like that. I just remember watching it and being like, wow, everybody's larger than life and big. Um, like for some reason, Piper stood out to me because I liked talkers. I liked sarcasm and I liked humor, and Piper was funny. Um, in fact, one of my favorite VHSs ever is I think it's the second Coliseum video that ever got released. It's the best of Roddy Piper, and really, it's just a bunch of interviews with him being sarcastic and being funny and interviewing himself. But as far as like teenage year Kyle that got into wrestling, it was Dean Malenko, the short people I love, short, skilled people. Dean Malenko is my all-time favorite. Technical sound, very focused. Taz, similar heights, and I'm stocky as shit too. And so that's why when I got into wrestling, I was throwing people over my head, pop them hips. And then the other aspect of it was people that I saw personality wise. Like Mick Foley was never going to be the biggest star, but he could talk. And the way he could eloquently tell a story and entertainingly and a little demented, that appealed to me. Tommy Dreamer could take a beating and keep on coming back. Wasn't the most handsome man, but still was a handsome man. I could relate to not being the best, but still being better than slightly average. And then there was the other wrestlers that were the people I wish I could be. I wish I could be Shawn Michaels in 96, 97. The man was sex on a stick. Shane Douglas, when he was the franchise coming back in ECW in 96, was probably one of my favorite things. It's why I used the belly to belly suplex when I started wrestling. Yeah, like those people just hit on certain levels. And then I discovered All Japan and all this other stuff, and Kawada and Misawa and all these other guys that I just big fan of all of them.
I don't know if this will apply to you just because, you even talking about Roddy Piper back then you loved. And then later on, Shane Douglas. So you kind of had a thing for a lot of heels, it seemed like. But was there any heels that drove you crazy? Because it's a compliment. I always I'll frame it as the most hated wrestler, but it's a compliment because that's what they want from you, right? They want you to hate them. They want you to get the reaction. But with the kind of fan you were, kind of reminds me of when I was a teen. I went through phases where I definitely hated wrestlers, but once I got to like 2004, 2005, I loved heel Randy Orton. I loved Carlito. I loved Mr. Kennedy because they were just cocky and brash, and I liked that as a teenager. But before then, of course, there were people I hated. Did you have that phase?
Yeah, definitely. But it was more like Sean Waltman I didn't appreciate ever. So
Mm-hmm.
like X-Pac, I was just like, no, please beat him. I think maybe because I was never like the biggest guy, and also I was a very heavy set kid. I had some resentment for like heavier wrestlers. So like an earthquake or something like that did nothing for me, I think, because of that concept of like, oh, I this if I got heavier, I could be this person. I wanted, they usually say the things that you hate most are things that you see in yourself that you don't like. And so for me, being a non-athletic kid, and being close to 300 pounds, I definitely was more leaning towards like the athletic type and all that other stuff. So if there was a heel, even if they were a great talker that just looked like somebody, I was like, oh, I don't have the confidence to be that person. It would be a turnoff to me. Wow, I'm getting really psychological here.
Honestly, I love that. I love, one thing about this channel is, and you're close with Sal, and we'll probably bring him up later. Sal Renaro, channel
Love
favorite.
Sal. He's one of my best friends.
We've had 3 interviews. He's been so generous with his time, and we got to like 2007 throughout 3 interviews, just because you go back and forth so much, and it's just the way the channel is. But in regards to Sean Waltman, was it X-Pac or was it 1-2-3 Kid? Because 1-2-3 Kid, with the baby diaper and baby powder, that was a lot of heat. That was a lot of heat.
It was 1-2-3 Kid because he just seems so obnoxious, and I didn't appreciate how good he was in the ring. I just
Mm-hmm.
looked at the whiny kind of character of it all. And then when, 6 came out in NWO, I was like, well, this guy seems like he's trying too hard. Like very spastic movements, very like the adopting the DX stuff and the crotch choppy stuff and this and that, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just felt like he was trying too hard. And now I realize like I was supposed to freaking hate this guy.
Yeah.
And then when he came to WWE, that wasn't my DX. My DX was Shawn, China, Triple H with Rick Rude as their manager. That was the DX I really liked. So it was also like a backup version of something. So as time's gone on and he's mellowed out and I can actually appreciate it as an adult, I can see what he's doing and I can see how amazing he is in the ring. It was not a nuance that I understood in my youth.
And honestly, it's probably for the best. He wasn't necessarily looking for you to cheer him, so it makes sense.
No, literally in wrestling, there's a thing called X-Pac heat.
Yeah.
Which is where you just, instead of wanting to see somebody get beat, you're like, never mind, I don't even want to see this person. So I mean, to be able to be so good at pissing people off that you have something named after you like that, whatever. I think that's pretty impressive.
Absolutely. He's definitely great. Okay, so moving on, you kind of brought this up a little bit, but if you could go more into it, how did you first break into wrestling? And did you know that's what you wanted to do, leading up to that moment?
I think anybody that gets into entertainment is a little bit broken inside and craves complete strangers to give a shit about them, which is probably not the most healthy thing to do. Now there's social media, there's the internet, you can become a TikTok star, you can do all these things. It's very
host a podcast.
Easy, but it's exactly. I was hosting a podcast with Billy Corgan. I mean, in this day and age, you can exist outside of the small world you grew up in, and you can have complete strangers pay attention to you. But me growing up, you had to be on TV or in a movie or something like that, or professional wrestling in order to get people to understand you exist outside of the area you grew up in, which is very important for developing, I feel too. Like, you need to see things outside of just where you're from, like traveling, meeting people, seeing different walks of life. Regardless of that, it was just one of those things where I craved somebody to give me worth. And to this day, I'm still really bad at self-worth. It's just the way I'm wired for no reason. Parents think I'm great. My friends think I'm great. My exes even think I'm great. Makes no sense. I still question it. So because of that, I needed somebody to give me outward worth. And so I wanted to get in professional wrestling because I grew up on comic books. I love comic books. It taught me a bunch of things like morals and other things such as that. But wrestling was life. Comic books merged together. You could be a character. You could become somebody that you aren't actually in real life, much like a soap opera star where you're just playing one person. And then that person eventually becomes who you are. So I looked at wrestling as an opportunity to reinvent myself and become something more than I was. And yet I never had the drive or anything, because even when I started lifting weights and I lost weight and I started getting into that, I was like, I don't know if I could do that. 5'9" at the time and still not the biggest guy, not the strongest, not the fastest. It just wasn't in the cards.
And it was a different time, to be fair, too.
It was a different time. I broke in 2006. And what ended up happening was I was an ECW fan. Of course, went out of business in 2001 at the very beginning of the year. And it still had kind of a cult thing of people being a fan. In 2005, WWE owned it and put on a reunion show in New York City. Everybody that wasn't contracted to that used to work for ECW, put on a second reunion show the night before in Philadelphia at the New Alhambra, or whatever we're calling it now. It was the ECW arena.
Was that Shane Douglas ran? I don't remember. I don't know if he ran it or not.
Shane Douglas, yes, and Francie.
Yep.
And so my cousin and I, being huge ECW fans, we got tickets to both shows. So I went down to Philadelphia to enjoy that show. And then the night after, New York City, and Ring of Honor, which essentially, if you get the history of it, Rob Feinstein started Ring of Honor and is no longer, of course, with it, because Rob Feinstein ended up being a problematic human being, which we will not touch on. But Rob used to sell bootleg compilation tapes at ECW Arena. And so we'd all buy these tapes. That's how we discover Mexico, Japan, all these things we could never see. Because again, the internet, not a thing back then. Now you can get it on YouTube and watch almost everything. But back then you had to get a VHS 4th generation, which means it's been copied from another VHS to another VHS not the best quality, not the best sound, but you were like, I feel like I'm experiencing something from another country that I get to watch in the car from my own home. When ECW folds, Rob Feinstein gets basically says all my money's made by selling these ECW tapes, like the live events. I can't do that. What if I put on my own shows and just sell those? Ring of Honor is formed. And essentially, I knew the company, but I'd only seen maybe the first show of it ever with the triple threat match with Loki, Bryan Danielson, and was it Chris Daniels? Again, everything merges together. So the ROH puts on a show the afternoon of the New York City ECW reunion show for WWE, and we go, let's just go. First time I've ever seen Austin Aries, first time I've ever seen CM Punk, all these people that ended up being quite a thing in my existence, I got to experience for the first time for no other reason than they happened to be running a show in between two ECW shows that I wanted to go to. And there was a flyer on the seat about a wrestling school that Ring of Honor had. And I was like, this feels like I used to when I go to ECW shows. It had a vibe. It was athleticism. It was violence. It was edgy. They used legit music that I knew as entrance music. And it was an experience. So I started going to ROH shows from that point forward up in New England, being a Connecticut guy. And after a couple of them, I kept on seeing these flyers on the seats. And I'm really bad about the women I'm dating taking advice from them. And the person I was seeing at the time, she's like, you should go to this school. You love wrestling. You're a born entertainer. This is something you should do. And I was like, I don't know. I can't, blah, blah, blah. And then like 3 other people I knew said it. And I was like, all right, I should do this, which pissed her off to no extent because it took a bunch of people that weren't her to tell me what was good for me. And she was absolutely right. And
It's funny how that works, though.
I did it with my ex-wife too. She got pissed because she'd give me advice and I wouldn't listen, and then somebody else would. So apparently, it's just how I'm wired. I don't trust people that are close to me because I just assume they're trying to be nice. So I took out a loan for $2,000. Bryan Danielson was the trainer at the ROH Academy at that time. I signed up, and thankfully, my cousin, his friend, was my friend, and he lived in Philly, which is right outside of Bristol, PA, where the ROH school was. And I would crash on my buddy's couch 3 nights a week. And I would train with Bryan Danielson, and I was horrible. I was absolutely horrible. He was and is one of the greatest athletes in professional wrestling. And this is the guy who trained me. And I did not put all the effort in that I should have. I could have literally done everything in the world to condition myself to get out of my own head, to learn, to evolve, to take opportunities as they were given to me. But I was just a pretty boy who was happy to be where I was and had a horrible attitude, and I failed miserably. And, that's how I ended up where I am today. An adult who realizes and looks back and says, hey, let me give advice to the younger guys about what not to do. Because now I'm a broadcaster that runs a wrestling company. But honestly, I wanted to be a pro wrestler, and I failed.
I like so much about what you said. There's a few different things I wanted to touch on. One is, I'm really glad you brought up, mental health, and you brought this up a few times, mental health. We just did an interview with Royce Isaacs, and the same subject came up, mental health.
Love Royce.
Oh, he's great. People. Great. And wrestling and mental health for a long time kind of didn't go hand in hand, but it seems like that stigma's starting to change, which is great to see. More people are embracing the mental health aspect, and I love that you brought that up. Another thing you brought up, and I'm just going to touch on this real quick, the RF thing, the scandal. We do have a video on that with Sal Rinauro talking about it, guys. So when you're watching this, go and look it up. I believe it's titled something to the effect of Sal Rinauro on when Ring of Honor almost died or closed down, something to that effect.
Sounds about right.
He talks about the weekend where, right after it happened and they had a show and everyone had to band together because they didn't even know if it'd be the last show, and it was super interesting. So check that out. But I do want to talk more about your training and Ring of Honor because that's so fascinating, the Ring of Honor school, because I feel like it kind of got a bad rap from a lot of fans for a while, and I don't really know why or if it was fair to, because, look at the trainers there. You had some incredible trainers.
Okay, so what we could talk about the school. So the first time I actually went to the school, it was in a warehouse in Bristol, PA. I went for a training seminar with Kenta. And
Wow.
I got lost on my way there. I showed up late. I wasn't in the shape to do anything, but that was where I talked to Bryan Danielson about the school, and he seemed very surprised that I wanted to sign up. And come to find out, it turns out because nobody wanted to sign up because Bryan was so intimidating to people that anybody that wanted to learn how to become a professional wrestler realized that, like, I'm probably going to die trying to do this with Bryan Danielson. So he was like the most intimidating person. Only two people ever signed up for the Ring of Honor school while Bryan was there. I was one of them. There was another kid that just quit. I ended up tearing my shoulder,
Oof.
and just as an example, I tore my shoulder, and I had no room to complain because Bryan had actually torn his shoulder in a match with Nigel McGuinness like 3 weeks before that and couldn't even lift his arm. And he's like, "We just do jumping jacks with one arm now." Like he no excuses, and I was all excuses. So the previous trainers there were CM Punk was the first trainer, then Austin Aries, then Bryan Danielson, and then it was Delirious. And eventually, Ring of Honor was sold and things changed. And I think now Cheeseburger trains people. But yeah, it was just think of that, like Punk, Aries, Bryan Danielson, and then Delirious all trained a whole bevy of professional wrestlers. Yeah. And the fans did not really care about any of us. We essentially were relegated to the pre-show. The only person from the school that really has made a name for themselves beyond all of that would be Rhett Titus, multi-time ROH tag team champion, one of my guys that we have in the NWA as well.
And even that took a while, it feels like. Once it hit with the All Night Express, it hit, but
it was a stigma. Like, we all had a stigma. Shane Hagedorn, one of my best friends, was essentially he became one of the main managers in Ring of Honor at that point in time with the Hangmen, and then he was in Sweet and Sour, and then he managed the Wolves, Davey Richards and Eddie Edwards, to tag team titles. And it was just one of those things where we all found a niche. Like I became a broadcaster, he became a manager. Bobby Dempsey became a comedy act with Sweet and Sour with his sweatsuit and everything, as Larry Sweeney would give him shit. The other guys that really were, I think, made a name for themselves other than that would be Mitch Franklin became Grizzly Redwood, which was a fun little character during that point. No joke about the little, sorry. But like, he became a bearded lumberjack. So we all developed kind of our own little thing. But Pele Primo was probably the most successful out of all of us in Ring of Honor when we were there, just because of his anger and aggression. I mean, he was a smaller cruiserweight high flyer that literally, if somebody picked a fight with him in the locker room, would be like, "I will punch you in the effing face." And then like people would be like, "Well, shit, what the hell?" Because you don't expect that from somebody like that. And then other guys that I was friends with during that time, Ernie Osiris, who became Dirty Ernie in Prince Nana's embassy during that time. But yeah, for the most part, it was just a bunch of us that developed and grew together and had a good time. But nobody ever really gave anybody there any respect about that. I mean, the roster would be nice to all of us and help us out because we were a part of that. But the fans, we were ancillary, and you never really expected anybody out of that group to be on a streak of winning matches. But it is what it is. It's one of the most important things about anything, as I mentioned this earlier. Like, if you grow up in a small town, you need to leave that small town. You need to experience the world around you. We grew up in Ring of Honor. And if we didn't go past that and experience life around there, it was detrimental to us, because you make a name for yourself and then you show your worth, and then maybe they'll see that. So I used to work for the National Wrestling Alliance back in 07 through 09 in Liberty States as mostly a manager, but then I'd wrestle every now and then. And, I was part of a group called the Players Club. Just weird things. Like, I got to wrestle Sid Vicious in NWA.
I'll definitely need a story on that after.
Favorite thing is he just was drinking a shitload of Sierra Mists, and somebody says, "Are you thirsty, Sid?" And he goes, "It's important to stay carbonated." To this day, I don't know if he was joking or if he really thought it was important to stay carbonated. Who's to say?
Who's to question Sid, too? That's a whole other thing,
Who's to say? But I mean, like, it's just one of those things. We all came up in the academy. We all did that. I'm so happy that Rhett has got a position now, and he's appearing in Ring of Honor still, aside from us. But for the most part, you you just build relationships with people, and that's the most important thing I learned from Ring of Honor, is that you got to build relationships, because to this day some of the relationships I built there have helped me get to where I am. I literally ended up in the National Wrestling Alliance, this current Lightning One iteration, because Billy Corgan's writing partner and everything at the time in wrestling was my former producer in ROH, and he called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to get back into wrestling?" And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, "Do you know who Billy Corgan is?" And I said, "Yes," because I'm the right age. And he explained to me that Billy bought the National Wrestling Alliance and he wants to run shows in Atlanta and do TV programming, and I'm local. And so,
We'll
long story
definitely
short,
touch
here I
on
am
that.
talking to you.
Hey, and I appreciate it. And we'll definitely touch on that a lot more. I find, the Lightning One era, the beginning of it especially, so fascinating, and there's so much to get into on that. When it comes to the school, you talked about how only other one person signed up under the Bryan period, but how big was your classes at the time? Like, were there still other students from the past and present still there? Like, what
Yeah.
did it look like when you're were you still living in Connecticut, traveling every time, or did you move out there? Like, how did that look?
No, I lived in Connecticut, and I would come to Philly every week and crash on a friend's
How
couch.
far of a drive is that, roughly?
3 hours.
Okay, it's not horrible.
So I drive 3 hours, crash for a couple days, then drive back. Um, but at the time, there was probably six of us. The Rhett, Ernie, Mitch Franklin, Grizzly Redwoods, Shane Hagedorn,
Were
Billy
they mostly
Primo,
before you?
Bobby Dempsey. Yeah, they were all before me.
Okay.
But they were local, and they would train, 2 times a week. And Shane Douglas, I'm sorry, Alex Payne also was there. Sugarfoot Alex Payne, which I don't know if anybody remembers. But Alex Payne and Shane Douglas ended up, Shane Hagedorn, sorry. It's actually how he got the name Shane, is he stole it from Shane Douglas. So
Oh, there you go.
it's funny that was a Freudian slip. Alex Payne and Shane Hagedorn ended up help finishing my training, because by the time I came back from my shoulder injury, Bryan had moved away and wasn't even in Pennsylvania anymore. And then ended up signing with WWE. So it was just one of those things where these guys took it upon themselves to help me out and befriend me and all this stuff. So I'll never forget that, because they made me feel very accepted for being kind of a weirdo as well, because I got a weird personality. I can't help it.
That's kind of the beauty of wrestling, though. I've always thought, where you can have people from so many different walks of life. And I remember talking to someone years ago about it. And what they brought up to me was, there was a group, maybe 4 people, right? And you had someone who's like a big kind of gamer, comic book kind of nerdy guy. And then you had someone who's like a jock football player. And then you had someone else who was like really into metal. And you're like looking at these 3 people and you're like, in what walk of life would they normally be so bonded and so close where they hang out 3 or 4 times a week? Because they're completely different personalities. But because of wrestling, they were, you can't see me because I'm not on camera, but I'm crossing my fingers. They were like this, you know what I mean? They were tight, and you wouldn't normally see that kind of bonding because they're just such different personalities. And that's what wrestling does. It brings people together.
Yeah, it's just one of those weird little environments. I never went to college, but I assume it's kind of like college, where you're away from home and you're learning a brand new world with people, and you're thrown together just because you're happen to be in the same place at the same time and might have the same interests. It's a little thing of misfit toys, but we all got into it because we were fans. For the most part, anybody that gets into this is stupid in the aspect where they're like, you know what I'd love to do for a living? That. And then you get it and you're like, this is ridiculous. I'm in pain. I'm not getting enough sleep. The travel, the this, that, and the other thing. And you're like, oh, I always remind myself right now whenever I get stressed about things where I'm like, Kyle from 5 years ago would love knowing that this is where you are right now.
That's a great attitude, a great mindset. It's one of those things where either you love it or you'll learn to love it, because if you don't, you're probably not going to want to stick around very long.
I think the most important thing in any relationship is to be realistic, live on reality's terms. And there's good things and bad things in every relationship, and relationships are everywhere from friendships to, romantic interludes to jobs and careers. And my relationship with professional wrestling is, damn, is it abusive? But when it loves me, it feels so good.
Yeah, it's like people describe wrestling and it sounds so toxic. You know what I mean?
It's just, it takes a lot. And also, being a guy who helps run a company and is on camera talent is I'm on 24/7, and it takes a lot of work-life balance. I don't know the wrestling aspect of it as much because, again, I was never successful at the wrestling aspect of it. I mean, I have friends that will work 5 shows a week. And meanwhile, in my head, I just go to like, I couldn't imagine having to plan 5 shows a week. Ugh, the logistics and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the physical grind and then there's the emotional. And I know the emotional grind. The physical, I don't know how a lot of people can do that because my neck's messed up, my shoulders are dislocated, I've got a bad knee and everything like that. But still, I know people that are going strong after 20 years and they're still healthy as all hell. Crazy.
This is jumping ahead a little bit, but since you brought it up, I guess, do you find that because you had that experience in the ring, and I noticed that you downplayed a lot, but you got to wrestle, you got to work with some great names, and we'll get to some of them hopefully within the interview. But do you find that it gives you a greater appreciation, especially since you do work behind the scenes, since you're quote unquote office, you have a more of appreciation for the talent because everybody will appreciate the talent and the talent will generally appreciate everybody working. But when you're someone who does both, you can see both sides, and it probably makes it a lot easier to understand both sides when there's an issue or you need to communicate something.
No, absolutely correct. And it's one of those things where you try to see it from both sides. But I also really think it's important to take what I've learned and the mistakes I've made and make sure that the younger talent, as I'm discussing things with them and giving them advice, that they don't have to make the same dumb mistakes I did. Like when ROH on HDNet got canceled, I had the attitude of, I'm used to doing things on this level, so why would I ever do it below here?
Yeah.
Which essentially just means I took my ball and I went home. I mean, we downsized and a lot of us lost our jobs with Ring of Honor at the time because it was barely keeping its doors open and I was a broadcaster. They're not going to fly me in. And then Sinclair brought it and it evolved, which I'm so happy for. But Kerry Silken, the former owner of Ring of Honor, really gave all of us a platform and was responsible for so many people in this entire wrestling landscape right now. From Kevin Owens to Sami Zayn to Seth Rollins to Claudio Castagnoli to Bryan Danielson to I'm running a wrestling company. Like all of us, Homicide, who I work with now. It's just so many people were given an opportunity to be so much greatness, and whether it was how we wanted it to be or not, I had this talk with Pat Kenny, who was in ECW, and I told him that, did he realize how pivotal ECW was to professional wrestling when he was in it? Essentially WWE adopted the style, the attitude, everything. It is one of those things that you look back and you say, like, ECW shaped the entire wrestling landscape for the next 20 years to come. When he goes, no, I had no idea at the time. We were just like, hey, this seems cool. We're having fun. Some people are doing drugs. Some people are having sex. We're just getting paid. We're trying to do what we're doing. And it dawned on me, like, Ring of Honor changed the next 20 years of professional wrestling. The technical style, the personalities, all of that was what, and the stars became the entire landscape of professional wrestling. And so I was like, oh my God, I was a part of the second weird thing that affected professional wrestling. And Pat's like, yeah. He's like, don't ever forget that. You were a part of something that shaped an entire, sport and industry. I was like, oh my God, I got goosebumps thinking about it. Because in my head, I'm like, I was just some guy that never worked out in the way I wanted to. But it's like we were a part of something weird. That's crazy. Like when I see all these guys that I know, like Adam Pearce, every time I see Adam Pearce on SmackDown or Raw or anything as the main authority figure, I'm like, it's so weird that Adam, my buddy, is the guy who gave me the opportunity to be a broadcaster, by the way. Awesome. Adam Pearce, when he took over like the creative in Ring of Honor, was like, Kyle, you're the shits in the ring. And I was like, oh God. And I was devastated. He goes, hold on, but you could talk. A lot of people can't talk. You're not going to ever be 6'3". You're not going to be 250 pounds of muscle, but you could talk better than almost anybody. And that's what you need to lean into. I want to make you our Mean Gene. I was like, I don't know. And he's like, just think it over. And I talked to a few people, and Austin Aries was just like, so let me get this straight. You're going to be on our programming every week. You don't have to get beat up. He goes, why wouldn't you do that?
No.
He goes, like, everybody on this program is a wrestler, which means everybody's trying to get somebody else's spot. Who the hell else is going to replace you doing what you do?
Yeah.
He was absolutely right. And it's and now I have to do ring announcing, voiceover work, interviews, backstage, all this stuff. Like literally during the Crockett Cup, my running joke was if you made a drinking game out of hearing or seeing Kyle Davis on any of these episodes, if you had to take a shot when you heard or saw me, you'd be dead within an hour. I had 50 plus segments on each of those episodes. It got to the point where from doing ring announcing to the interviews to the voiceover, to the backstage, to this, to post-match interviews on camera, I would just hear my voice when I'm in the ring waiting to talk, I'd hear my voice on something. I'd be like, ugh, because I hate my voice.
I understand. Trust me. I understand exactly how that goes. I edit all my own videos, so I hear my own voice constantly. And every time I was just like, oh, I hate it. I'll hear like a stutter or stammer, and I'll get so mad, or I'll hear the same word I use over and over, and I'm just like, oh, I hate it. But
yes, I'm always cognizant of that when I have to do the stand-ups at my house for like special episodes for green screen and everything like that. I'm sort of a green screen at my house, and I'm just talking to the camera myself. Nobody's around, and I'm just throwing things out in my head. And if I have to do something like the Crockett Cup Tag Team Seed Rundown, that's 26 teams where I'm trying to be like, did I describe somebody in a similar manner already? Yeah. And I'm like, ugh. So just trying to think of that, like, I don't want to keep on saying the same term over. I want to add a nuance to it. I want to do this. I want to do that. It's a struggle. It's real.
But it seems like you did take Austin's advice to heart because, I mean, look at you now. You're in a position where you are essential to the team. I mean, I know people won't like to look at it that way. You probably wouldn't even like to look at it that way because you seem like a pretty humble guy in that sense. But you are a key component where without you, not saying you couldn't ever be replaced, but it would be very difficult to replace you. And with talent, It's a lot. Not that, I'm definitely not a believer that talent is, like a plumber. Like I remember there was like, I think an old WCW person, maybe Jim Hurd. I don't know. I could be incorrect on that. And there was like, they compared talent to being a plumber where they're like, oh, you
that
can
sounds
just
like
get
a Jim Hurd move.
And obviously that's
at all. Everybody's
dismissive.
got a personality.
Absolutely.
It's very dismissive. And I always want to make sure that whenever I'm talking to people, it's very easy to get lost in your day to day and get buried with so much going on. Like right now, Joe and I are super buried, and I'll have one of our wrestlers text me a question or something. And I always try to remember, like, not to be dismissive because for all they know, they're not going to realize what I'm going through because nobody ever knows what anybody's going through. Nobody ever knows what like moment they reach out. But if somebody sends me a message and asks me a question, I'm like, don't worry about it. It's not your problem. Or like, just shut them off. What happens the next time they want to talk to me? They're going to remember that and they're going to think, oh, Kyle doesn't give a shit, or Kyle doesn't care about me in person, or maybe they hate me, or this, that, or the other thing. You never know how your actions are going to affect somebody else because you're not paying attention in the moment about how you're coming off to somebody.
Yeah.
And you can never be 100% about that. But I always try to remember that and be like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm busy right now. Or my apologies for keeping you waiting, or this, that. It's just, I try to think of like the damage that I have and like how that would affect me if I didn't do that. And I'm just like, well, maybe somebody will see where I'm coming from and realize that like right now I'm the problem in our communication.
And it never hurts to be nice. If more people in the world were nice to each other, I think the world would be a better place. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Too.
I don't think people are inherently horrible. I think sometimes people are emotionally stunted and also ignorant to what's going on around them. And sometimes that gets the worst results. So yeah, you're right. It's always important to take care and think of somebody else.
I'm loving this interview, and I have a bad feeling that we're not going to be able to get through the notes, which, by the way, I'm used to. I never get through the notes in my interviews.
You can also just rapid fire, and I'll try to shut up. I talk a lot. Sorry.
No, I much prefer it. I much rather get in the weeds and have real answers. Who wants to hear like yes or no questions? You know what I mean? Like I'd rather have a real discussion, like what you're doing, where you give your real genuine thoughts or philosophy on things than just just a summation. Like that's no fun. Like I love what you're doing, so I appreciate it. But I do want to ask about when you were training. Gabe and Carrie, because you brought up Carrie earlier, and like a pro you transitioned, did they ever go to practice? Did they communicate with you guys at all, or was it really hands off from them?
No, Kerry was definitely somebody that you could talk to. I mean, he was never at the actual office, but at shows and everything, Kerry is one of the sweetest guys I know, and he went out of his way to give everybody an opportunity. Literally, like, Kerry lost so much money on Ring of Honor, but
Yeah.
he was a wrestling fan, and he had such a relationship, a connection with all of us that literally he'd be like, I just, I know it's going to cost a lot, but let's just keep this guy around for a little bit, give him a shot, maybe. Gabe
So
hated me.
oh,
Gabe hated me, and it's my own fault because I am very outgoing and obnoxious. And instead of kissing Gabe's ass like most people do trying to get a position, I would be like, "Hey, Gabe!" I did that thing where instead of waiting to be accepted, I just went, if I just act like I'm accepted, everybody's going to have to accept me. And so Gabe, I would just come up to and I'd be like, look at you with a button-up shirt on today. Somebody's trying. It looks good on you. And he would just hate me because I would just bust his balls all the time. And Gabe was the guy who was, making sure that the talent was on the show. So few and far between when I get opportunities because of my own being a jackass.
ribbing
But
the boss is a choice. I'll give you that. Ribbing the boss is a choice.
yeah, I made a choice, which was to make myself entertained and pop the boys, as they would say. And then as time went on, of course, worked in my favor because Adam Pearce liked me because of just that personality.
That works out perfectly. Oh, that's actually a great point too. And again, skipping ahead a little bit, not a big deal. I'm not sure the exact timeline, but when Adam Pearce took over, you were still there. So, what was your experience as a talent at that point when Gabe in, Gabe out, Adam Pearce in? Like, how informed were you? Did you know what was going on? Because again, I know you were relatively low in the totem pole, so I don't think they were necessarily being like, "Hey, this is what's going on."
Oh
But
no, the office was at the ROH Academy. The office, the people that ran the company were the people that we dealt with the most
oh wow, okay,
as the students, because we were also ring crew. They'd handle our travel, they'd do all this stuff, and also as ring crew and being kind of like outgoing people, the actual like main roster would friend us and take us under the wing and kind of mentor us. So we were privy to a bunch of stuff. I remember the entire night that Adam Pearce got the position. It was an NWA World Title match at the Hammerstein Ballroom.
mm-hmm.
It was him versus Brett Albright for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. So funny how everything comes full circle. And they had a very old school match that the crowd loved. And it was unlike anything that Ring of Honor, the normal style, it's basically AEW style is Ring of Honor style of what it was back in the day, and like PWG and all this stuff. And this was more of a classic old school wrestling match, and the crowd was very open to it because of the way it happened and the way it was paced. And it appealed to Kerry Silken, who owned Ring of Honor. And at this point in time, he was looking to possibly make a change. And he recognized that this person had a different view of what was currently going on. And he gave Adam an opportunity to, decide, hey, let's see if we can't evolve the way people look at Ring of Honor. And that was what happened. Is at the same time, we got the HDNet programming on Mark Cuban's HDNet show, which was the first ever professional wrestling program filmed in HD. We were the first ever. And at this point, that's when Adam was trying to structure and decide what he wanted. And he was like, I want you to be our guy backstage. I want you to be our interviewer like Mean Gene. And that's what happened. And so Adam Pearce is super, and you'll see it on my socials. You'll see me talk about this all the time. Adam gave me an opportunity to be something else than what I was. And he saw something in me that I didn't realize, even begrudgingly at the time. So to this day, and Adam's very open about it. He goes, all I did was just give you an opportunity to do something that I thought you'd be good at, that you are good at. He's like, the rest of it was just you running with that ball. But nobody would have put me in that position otherwise. If Adam Pearce hadn't had that NWA World Championship match in Ring of Honor getting somebody to see this style of wrestling could be something, or at least seeing a different version of it and putting him in a position to make choices, and then him making a choice about me and me running with that, I would not be where I am today.
It's crazy. Adam Pearce, he's a channel favorite. It seems like everybody on the channel loves talking about him. I probably have a dozen different Adam Pearce clips on the channel, and eventually I'm going to be doing those compilations of like different wrestling personalities talking about someone. He'll be the first one because there's so much. What you brought up is really interesting because his style was classic NWA pro wrestling, and it's so interesting how that's where you are now. Now you're in the NWA, and here's a guy who completely changed your career and your career trajectory at the time, and now you're in a company that's so based off what he was doing, or what he was doing.
Because of Adam Pearce, I became a broadcaster, and because of Adam Pearce, I met Dave Marquez from Championship Wrestling in Hollywood, because Dave at the time was running NWA, and because of him, he was like, hey, he put me on a show on the East Coast. I wrestled Marty the Moth on a show that had like the Young Bucks against the Logan brothers. And nobody knew who any of us were. And now some of them are millionaires, and I'm this guy. Just like every time I read online how much money Kevin Steen makes now, and Seth Rollins, and seeing everything they have, I'm just like, yes, because you want good people to be successful, and there's nothing like seeing people that you remember when they were just a normal human being become a celebrity and at the top of their field, and also having still interactions with them here and there and being like, they're still a normal human being. That is the greatest thing ever, to see that success and money and all this stuff doesn't ruin somebody, and they're still a good human being at heart. But I was wrestling these NWA shows up in New England, up on the East Coast, because of Dave Marquez. And it's just crazy to think that if Adam Pearce wasn't in Ring of Honor, I wouldn't be where I am today. And again, like, Dave Lagana was the guy who was our producer and director in Ring of Honor, and he was the one who was working with Billy Corgan. He's how I got into NWA. And now, fast forward, it's been 5 years since I came in to the National Wrestling Alliance to do a press conference. I hosted a press conference with David Arquette in a hair versus hair match. It's the first thing I ever did with the Lightning One era of everything here. And then we decided to do the Power program, and we did pay-per-views and all this stuff. And it's crazy that I basically started at one of the first pop-up shows of this version of the National Wrestling Alliance.
That is crazy.
Man, full circle. Insane. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, right? Wow.
Yes.
When you were
I've been in this company longer than Joe Galley. Yes.
Wait, really? I don't even realize that.
Yeah, I have. Now that I'm thinking about it, because he didn't start until we started doing Power.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's 4 years for him, and 5. Yeah. Wow.
It's like 4.5 for him and like 5 for me.
So just edging him just a little bit.
Oh, if he was here right now and you said edging him just a little bit, I'm sure him and I would go in a very different conversation than you used to.
Quickly moving along.
Don't Google that, kids. Don't Google that, kids.
When you were a student with Ring of Honor, before you started wrestling, you talked about doing ring crew and whatnot. Did you guys have any other responsibilities? Like, did they throw you on security? Did they have you cooking popcorn? Did you did what roles were you given? Tear down and all that stuff?
Yeah, ring crew would be tear down, security, being a gopher, making runs if somebody needed something. Jimmy Jacobs was always good for whenever we were in the Chicago area. Jimmy really liked me and liked my personality. So he'd be like, I need a ride real quick. Kyle needs to give me a ride. So he'd get me out of ring crew and I'd go drinking with him.
That works.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you were the catch-all. You'd work merch. You would be the guy who runs people's like ring entrance attire back and forth. You'd be security. You'd start up breakdown. If you were lucky, you'd have a dark match before the show on the pre-show. We actually had for the students, we had a top of the class trophy, which was like the pre-show championship. Never had any of that, but still, had one top of class trophy match. Didn't go well. But yeah, you could do a little bit of everything, and it's how you learn. And that's one of the things that I always remember now. You never forget that stuff. Like when when there was 5 of us sleeping in a hotel room for 4.5 hours simply because we're going to pass out while driving the ring truck, and I would just sleep on a floor. So whenever somebody complains to me, I'm like, what happened to sleeping on floors?
Yeah.
Like, do people not do that anymore? I don't know. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm an old man now. I'm going to tell stories when I used to walk up the hill and down the hill. And blah, blah,
Back in
blah.
my
It's
day.
just the craziest thing. Yeah. But it's one of those things where I tried to never forget that. I remember when Claudio Castagnoli signed with WWE and they went to FCW. I lived in Florida at the time, and Florida Championship Wrestling, FCW, became NXT. I was driving down the road and I'm looking over and I see this tall sumbitch hammering nails of like a flyer on a telephone pole, and I'm like, is that Claudio? I pull over and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, oh, hey, Kyle. They have me putting up flyers right now. It's one of those things. They just want to break us all in, and I've done it before, but hey, I'm happy to be here. And I went to the show and I saw him and Seth Rollins and a couple other guys I know. And after the show, they had to do ring crew. They were all breaking down the ring, and I was like, what is going on? And Seth was just like, he was Tyler Black, as I know him. He was just like, yeah, the problem is like they get a lot of guys that are in the wrestling industry before. So they make us all do the stuff you would if you were breaking in to teach us all lessons. And for guys like us that have done it, kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Got to play by the rules. Now
Just, yeah, exactly. It paid off. Real quick, when it comes to the tearing down when you're doing ring crew, did they also have you in charge of, not specifically you, but the group in charge of doing the set too? Because I know the fact that you were filming for HD and this was a little more elaborate. It was a little pricier. Like,
no, there was stage and like the metal awning stuff and all this other stuff. Yeah, we had to put all it together. We had to be able to do the lighting stuff. We had a lighting guy that would help us. But as far as like building the towers and everything for the lights, camera work sometimes, working the spotlights. Oh man, we had these yellow. I don't remember the name of what we could call this, but it's essentially you could build it up so you could be up high. What is that? Scaffolding.
Yeah.
Scaffolding is the word I'm looking for. With this big yellow scaffolding. So we'd have to build the scaffolding, and that stuff was janky as all hell. And also you were like, I'm the one building this and I'm the one climbing up there. Oh, it only collapsed twice. And I remember Ernie Osiris we thought was going to die. And luckily that boy knows how to fall. But yeah, we were responsible for all that stuff, which is so funny because in NWA, when things are happening and stuff like that, there's always a part of me that's just like, man, I have no idea.
That's cool though. I was just curious because I know on a lot of local, like lower indie shows around here, even because I am in the New England area where you came up from, actually.
I know. I saw your phone number, 860 area code.
Yeah, let's just put it there. But yeah, I know the ring crew there. Obviously, they handle all the set pieces, but I didn't know because Ring of Honor was on TV in HD, if they necessarily entrusted you guys with that. It's good that they did, although you probably would have almost preferred if they didn't.
To this day, we joke about it, like in NWA, because Joe and I do so much that it's like I literally am still waiting for the day when I have to start setting up staging. I mean, like, because I'll just be like, oh, old times, welcome back, my friend. Luckily, I don't have to. That's nice.
Let's get into your in-ring debut finally. And like I take you in all sorts of directions up and down the timeline of your life and career. But September 14th, 2007, Detroit, Michigan for ROH Motor City Madness is what my notes claim.
I got a tattoo on the inside of my note, right here, 9/14/07. I got a tattoo right on the inside of my arm.
So it was.
That's why I was like, that's accurate.
That's
my first match was against Shane Hagedorn, if I remember right. I've never seen the match.
I don't remember seeing the match, but it was with Shane.
No, I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
Really?
I've never seen it. I have no idea. I've seen my second match, which was against Alex Payne, but I've never, ever seen my first match.
Did they not record it, or did you just not see it?
It's recorded. Everything was recorded, and usually it was just like one hard cam. But I've never seen it. It's probably in a VHS tape somewhere. Grizzly Redwood probably has it somewhere. Very interested about it because Shane was and continues to be one of the closest people in my life. I don't get to talk to him as much. He is one of the guys that does merchandising and backstage in AEW right now. So he's got a sweet ass job. I'm very happy for him because he's making a living full time in professional wrestling, which is always the dream. And he was the guy who helped train me, and so he could also make other people look good. There's certain people that aren't respected for what they can do, where people will watch a match with them and be like, "Ah, they're not much," but that other guy's great. That's that other guy looks even better because that person you're not noticing how much they're actually doing. And Shane was one of those guys. Love that guy. And so, yeah, that was my first match. And it took me forever to get there because I got hurt and I didn't really put in the motivation and everything. And I half-assed a lot of stuff. And I also made the mistake of not working outside of Ring of Honor, whereas a guy like Rhett Titus would work 3 times a week. I would just work Ring of Honor because I had a serving job and I made really good money as a server in it. I didn't want to lose that money. Wrong attitude. Or maybe the right attitude. I ended up in a good place. Who knows? Everything happens the way it's supposed to.
Were you nervous going in, or did you think you were ready, or were you ready?
I don't think I'm ready for what I do now. I have immense anxiety, and if you ever see me in front of a camera, I had to psych myself up to do that. Even what I do now, like having to do like on camera stuff for NWA, I am never in emotionally good place when I have to do it because it just stresses me out. Because at the end of the day, I'm just like, imposter syndrome's real. The good news is that as time's gone on, the less preparation I have for something, I feel like the more natural and the better it is because I don't think about it. But yeah, anxiety. That's why I have a medical marijuana card. Anxiety. I was not ready to wrestle. I probably was never ready to wrestle. And it's like anything else. If you put in the repetitions, it becomes second nature, muscle memory. I never put in the repetitions. So it wasn't something where I could just naturally feel like it's time to go wrestle. I wasn't prepared for it ever. I wasn't physically fit enough to be what I should have been able to do, which were living up to the people that I trained with, the people that trained me, the people that I idolized. The good news is I talk all the time. So at least now I'm prepared to be able to do this or whatever I have to on the verbal aspect of it. But I still, to this day, I'm like, ugh, this is going to suck.
During this
And then it
period,
doesn't.
during this period, did you realize, like, hey, I'm not doing the right thing? Or were you just were like, I know this isn't the right thing, but maybe I can skate by? Or were you just thinking, no, I'm doing the right thing? Like, what was your mindset at the time?
I recall in my mid-20s just being ambivalent and just being like, I'm pretty effing cool. I'm pretty cool. Look what I do. This is my thing. Women like me. I keep on I keep on doing things. And essentially being that awkward kid and like the heavyset one growing up, like when I became a pretty boy professional wrestler and women were really interested in me and I could, have a nice friend everywhere I went, I was just like, this is it. This is life. I have worth now. It wasn't until later on that I really realized how like really unhealthy emotionally that is and how messed up it was and how responsible I was for my own shortcomings and failures because I didn't put in the work, the effort, or the opportunities that were given to me. I was just busy enjoying a moment, which actually, the one good thing about enjoying the moment is I would also take pictures and film things constantly.
That's good.
So, which nobody really would do then. And it was kind of frowned upon. But in retrospect, I always have people be like, I'm so happy you did all that because you've got like footage of all of us hanging out and photos of like the groups and stuff and everything else. So, um, yeah. But yeah, I at the time, I don't think I realized how much at fault I was for why things weren't happening.
Was
Instead of
anyone
pulling Gabe
trying?
aside, no, no. Nobody ever was like, hey, get your shit together.
Okay.
Like if I had pulled Gabe aside and had a conversation with him, so like, what do you need from me to show you my worth? I wasn't adult enough to do that.
Gotcha.
Which is very important because a lot of times people might not realize what you're looking for or see something in you until you mention it and show the initiative and say, hey, I would like this opportunity. You tell me what I need to do to show you my worth to get that opportunity so I don't let you down. Most people don't do that ever. They just get butthurt because they're like, oh, how come this isn't happening for me? Or how come this? It's like, have you made it known that this is what you want? And then once you've made it known, have you backed up those words with actions so that somebody who is in a position to do that and help you out and give you opportunity wants to and knows that you even want it.
A lot of it's growing up. Like the way you're describing it, like there's just a lot of immaturity that maybe you had to work through at the time, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's still a growth thing. But there's to this day, I have friends that I work with that I go out of my way because I realize like they might not say something in the right opportunity that could help them out, which is making what they want known. And it's I ended up where I am because people that were in positions saw something in me and knew what I wanted and felt comfortable to give me an opportunity, and I was successful with it. I am now in that position where if I see somebody who's talented or has an opportunity that they can teach somebody else or grow or be this, to, if I'm aware of it, make the other people that are also in a position to make that stuff happen aware of it, and also pull that person aside and be like, go say something right now about this so they know too. Because it's otherwise it's just me vouching for you. If you show that person that you want this, they will believe you and see that, and something can come of that.
I love the way, again, I just the mindset you've brought to this has been, I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Your character at the time, because you went through, I guess, two different nicknames. One particular is really funny, but let's start with eye candy.
Well, it was internet. I had internet millionaire Kyle Durden, which
Yep.
was essentially the douchebag guy who ran Girls Gone Wild. That was who I put that over, which is just like, this dude has got no business being successful, but he's just all of a sudden he came into all this randomness.
So
He's a
that was
womanizer. He travels. It was whoever the dude was that was Girls Gone Wild. I can never remember his name, but like real garbage human being. That was where my internet millionaire Kyle Durden thing came from. I'd film promos. Like I remember filming vignettes and stuff like that, where I just like do vlogs, as they call them, before anybody else was doing them. Jesus, this makes me annoyed too. I would be like, we'd be near a hospital and there'd be a helicopter landing. And I'd be like, oh my God, if I get close enough to this, I could film something so it looks like I'm getting off the helicopter, and cut a quick promo to the camera. And I'll say it's like Mexico City. It's not, it's Iowa. But
Joe
I
Francis.
do all these things. Could be. I don't know. Joe Francis. Yes. Like I remember talking to Lance Storm one time. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to film these little videos and stuff like that. And he's like, I don't think that's going to help. Then the Young Bucks filmed little vlogs and videos, and people started caring about them as people outside of the ring, and it evolved. That was the whole point. I was like, well, if somebody gets like a character version, maybe because this, that. And I remember like Lance Storm being like, no, I think that's a waste of time. Retrospect, hindsight's 2020. And the other one was Eye Candy Kyle Durden, which I have an eye candy tattoo right here on my forearm still, which was what was on the groin of my gear, which was essentially the Kyle Durden thing too. Is Fight Club. My legit first name is Kyle. I use my real name now, Kyle Davis, which is super generic, and everybody's got a Kyle Davis in their life. Sorry. But Kyle Durden was because there was no Kyles in the wrestling business, and then Durden was Fight Club. And of course, Shane Hagedorn was the only one that really got the joke, which was, oh yeah, so like Tyler Durden is the worst version of him, but he this thinks is great, but it's really self-destructive and is not good for anybody. I'm like, yes, that's me. I became a pretty boy womanizer and was horrible to be around. And that's the truth of the matter. I was not a good person. I was kind of a piece of shit. And that's because I was so insecure and I hated who I was that I was like, this seems like a cooler version. I'd rather be doing this and have fun and have life experiences. And the answer is a happy medium between. Be yourself, but be confident and have life experiences. And then like, it's kind of like the rules of attraction. Like if you put something out there, it'll come back to you. I don't know if that's real or not, but I recently have been going through it. I went through a divorce late last year, and I've gotten more confident in accepting my own skin. And I feel like, yeah, there's some truth to that. Like if you're just who you are, to thy own self be true, as Shakespeare would say, it'll come back and work out for you.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that you were saying, you know, you wanted to have all these attributes because you know it would make a good heel and you know people would hate you for it. And then you're also saying, but this was kind of my real attributes at the time. Like, were you putting that together? Like, were you like, oh, I'm a heel in real life? Or were you just, or was that not even, like, did you not even somehow connect that?
No, it was just one of those things. In retrospect, I realized that I was leaning into things that were leaning into who I wanted to be instead of
Yeah.
who I really was,
Yep.
and it was just to compensate so I couldn't be hurt. Um, yeah, super weird, but it is what it is. It's good to be aware of that, and I think a lot of people do that on a daily basis. I unfortunately or fortunately was in a position to do it for cameras in front of me, and I always joke about like I'm an F level celebrity, probably lower on the totem pole, but like I got the thing, which is people I've never met before know I exist, and it's super weird. Um, and again, it's just I was given the opportunity to live a life I never thought I'd have, and thankfully, as an adult version of me, I balanced everything out and come to terms with a bunch of things, and can now help out the next generation of professional wrestlers, uh, being on camera, behind the camera, or just as someone who's, hey, let me tell you about my faults, and let me tell you about how you can grow beyond the person you are today and evolve and be something better.
Wrestling celebrity is such an interesting thing because you just brought it up, and it's something I've always thought about but never really verbalized or talked about. Because you know, you talk like, even like, take somebody in WWE right now, Seth Rollins, for example. He's on TV in front of 1.5 to 2.5 million people per week, depending on how good or bad the week is, right? You look at most other TV shows, and most other ones aren't even that close. But if you ask the average person, even those in wrestling, they'll be like, oh, he's just a wrestler, he's not a celebrity. But if you think about it, he's being viewed by so much more people than most
Yeah,
actors are, and have
you
such
go
a
through the toy
huge,
aisle and there's action figures
yeah,
of them and everything like that.
social
Yeah,
media
like they
following so much bigger.
they are so it's one of those things where it's like, what kind of celebrity are you going for? Are you going for somebody who you see in a major motion picture or this, that? Or are you going for somebody as far as like a random person on the street knows you exist?
Yeah.
If it's a random person on the street knows you exist, like wrestlers are big time celebrities. I'm just very low on the totem pole, and I'm not. So it's just like, and the thing that always reminds me of this is like, I work for a legit musical
Rock star, yeah.
celebrity. I have to talk to Billy Corgan every day. He's my boss. He's my friend. He's my nemesis. He's everything. He's a father figure. He's the guy who jabs me and gets joy out of pissing me off. I swear sometimes he just says things just because he knows it's going to get me fired up and he thinks it's funny. Um, but I always remember like this dude, random people know him.
Yeah.
He's been successful for 30 years doing things and listening to people's advice and saying, no, I'm going to do it my way. And it's worked for him. So I can't argue with him ever. I remember when I got the office position, he came over and he's wearing head to toe zero regalia, black and white. I said, let me ask you a question. I was like, is this just something you could buy, or is this something you had custom made for yourself? And he looked at me and he goes, I don't know if you're screwing with me or not right now. I go, no, you're a rock star. I'm a normal human being. I would never dress like this. But for you, is this you? Or he goes, Kyle, what kind of asshole do you think I am? This stuff is available on the website. I'm wearing it so people will buy this stuff. He's like, you think I would just have this made for me custom? I was like, I don't know. You're not a human being. You're a rock star. He's like, ugh. But then inversely, once I humanize him and on things, depending on where we are, he's like, don't ruin the mystique.
That's great. That's fantastic. Now, unfortunately and fortunately, again, we're not going to be able to get through all the notes, but I did want to fast forward a little bit to the NWA because there's something we brought up earlier, and that was, the NWA's growth. And hopefully, if I'm lucky enough, maybe we can talk again in the future, do a part 2 where we can really dive into.
No, we totally can.
Cool. I want to talk about the NWA in 2023 and 2022 because, after the pandemic, and that's something I really want to dive into in the future, is the pandemic, because that's I don't feel like enough people talk about the wrestling pandemic, probably because people want to forget about it because it was such a hard time in life. But I feel like with wrestling, it's so fascinating. But to
if
2022,
Billy Corgan wasn't a successful rock star, the NWA would not have made it through there because we couldn't run shows, we couldn't do anything. We went dark, like everything fell apart.
yeah.
We had these big ass plans. we were on the rise, sky was the limit, and then the world shut down.
Yeah.
Whereas WWE had enough money and know-how where they just put up video screens of people's faces and filmed at their studio and this, that. AEW lucked out because, again, millionaire, billionaire owners, they had Daly's place right on the outside, outdoors. Okay, we'll just test our wrestlers. We'll have them front row, and it'll be like there's a crowd there. Like those two companies had a means on a weekly television program that was live each week, not pre-taped. We tape ahead of time. That they were able to work all around this and have an outlet for it, whereas we were not able to do that, and we almost didn't survive. So,
basically killed Evolve and Ring of Honor. I mean, Evolve had to shut down because they couldn't afford to run the shows anymore, and Ring of Honor paid their talent all the way through, but then they couldn't afford it anymore.
And then it got purchased by AEW. But it's just one of those things where the best laid plans, and then you try to do what you do. We had a 5-year plan, and about a year and a half of that got thrown out the window, and it set us back real far. And we are still trying to find our footing. And we have something on the horizon that hasn't been publicly made yet that I may or may not be the thing that gets us back on our footing. We're going to find out what goes on. But the cool thing about having William Patrick Corgan, Billy Corgan, as NWA owner and NWA president, is that guy doesn't like to fail. And he has the means and the wherewithal to go through the bumps in the road and realizes that I've told him before, I'm like, I dream of one day we're never going to be WWE, never going to be AEW. That's not us. We're our own little niche. We exist as our own thing. We're an alternative to those. And trying to live up to somebody with production value like that is just, you're never going to do it. So you can't be the biggest thing ever, but you could be a different thing that's successful. You don't try to be somebody else because you're just going to fail. But if you do your own thing, you never know what could happen. Think of ECW.
I think the Eric Bischoff quote that he uses all the time is greater than, lesser than, or different to. And you can either be greater than, less than, or different to. You don't want to be less than. You probably can't be greater than, so you got to be different to.
Yeah, and there's times where I'm just like, man, we're so close to like finding the thing that clicks. And Billy goes, you know how many shows I played in a band where like 14 people were in the crowd, and I was like, everybody's like, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to be there. And he goes, and then just randomly, he goes, I swear it happened overnight. We got airplay on something, and then somebody discovered. He's like, you never know the thing that's going to hit. He's like, if we knew what it was, we could have been that, but we didn't. So we just threw a bunch of shit against the wall and saw what happened. And here we are. And the National Wrestling Alliance, we're finding our identity as time goes on. And I think that's super important, is to constantly be striving to find your lane and be something. We started as a nostalgia brand, and now we're trying to evolve into a modern brand that has that legacy. Where history lives and legends are forged is one of our new lines that we started using, because it's true. Like, history lives in the National Wrestling Alliance, but generationally, we're trying to forge some of the people of tomorrow. And we don't have the giant stage that other companies have, and that's fine. So we have to survive on our own merits. And one of the things that I really enjoy, and that people might not realize, is Ricky Starks is a giant star in AEW. Ricky Starks first got his national attention with us.
Yeah.
LA Knight, who has been all over the world on other companies and everything like that, he was with us, and then he re-signed with WWE during the pandemic and all this. The pandemic stopped our talent from being able to work with us, and some people went elsewhere. Thunder Rosa is a giant star now, and Thunder Rosa was our women's champion. So you see a lot of people like Zicky Dice and stuff, and Royce Isaacs is making a name for himself in New Japan. That's the thing that makes me happy, is to realize, like, oh, we have talent that people realize are amazing. And we have a proof of concept of, like, just, we need people to have more eyes. And I think a lot of times people have a stigma where they don't realize what they have until it's gone. And I hope we never have the talk where the NWA is gone. because we have a lot to give, we have a lot to offer, and we have a lot of growth on the horizon. And a lot of stars of tomorrow you're going to find today. And I'm telling you, man, like guys like Alex Taylor, Joe Alonzo, the Kerry Mortons, Tom Latimer, of course, is just. You remember earlier in this podcast, I mentioned about like Shawn Michaels being like, shit, look at that guy. If only I could be him.
Mm.
We always joke about this, and wrestling is a very, we're all very aware of how things can sound, but there's times we'll talk about like, who do you think is the most attractive person in the National Wrestling Alliance? You can be in a room full of guys, and one of us will go, I mean, there's also Tom Latimer. And we're like, oh, yeah, Tom Latimer, Tom Latimer. It's a bunch of straight men talking about how hot Tom Latimer is. That's how you know you're attractive. We don't even want to hook up with you, but we're like, the hair, the accent, the tan, the abs. Jesus, look at him. If only. We have a locker room full of talent, and right now Knox and Murdoch destroying the tag team division, winning the Crockett Cup. I am so happy to see them, and I hope we get to able to give them an opportunity internationally and kind of work with some other companies. We've worked in AAA recently.
Kenzie Page,
sky's the
she's
limit.
taken over the women's division.
Kenzie
She's incredible.
Page.
Incredible.
Let me tell you something. Kenzie Page, Thrillbilly Silas Mason.
Yes.
Kenzie's sister, Kylie Page, Ella Envy, all pretty empowered. Dr. Tom Pritchard has some of the, I don't know what he puts in the water when he's training people. I don't know what he does. But Dr. Tom A is a hell of a man to work around, hell of a person to be around. And I love picking his brain all the time or just shooting the shit with him. But like the people that he has trained also are definitely the future of wrestling. And I think it's so cool that, I get to see people when they're like 20 years old and I can just be like, I'm going to name drop the shit out of that person down the road because they are going to be huge. Yes.
But yeah, it's just the women's division in the NWA is really taken off. I feel like it's been like, because Camille, obviously, she's the face of in my opinion, she's the face of the company. First it was Nick, and then, Tyrus could be argued Tyrus, but to me, Camille, because she's been the champion for how many days now? You would know better than me.
7, at the time we're talking about this, we're there like the 730-ish days. She's been champion for 2 years. And I mean, she's a defending champion. She wrestles all over the world.
Yeah.
And not going to lie, a lot of times she's, no matter what your metric is, has the most memorable match on her shows.
Yeah.
And hard-hitting, aggressive, athletic, and also just her and Tom together definitely are the NWA power couple. I mean, look at that.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for this. I have one question I like to hit people with before we hit plugs, and if we do talk again, I'm going to throw it at you again because it changes.
I kind of stand up when I wipe, if that was the question. It's weird. I know that there's a sitting in this. Oh, we're not talking about that. Never mind.
Well, that's the interview, everybody. Thank you so much. No, I guess you could incorporate that to this. What does the future look like for Kyle Davis?
At some point, I'm going to be dead. I know that much. The future, it's the one thing in life none of us are getting out of this journey in one piece.
Unless technology really improves.
No, it's going to be dark, man. Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
As things collapse and get harder and the environment collapses, I don't want to be alive in 100 years. Ugh, what a nightmare that'll be. No, what the future looks like is hopefully I still look good for my age. I still have my brain and my legs and everything else, and I'm able to be able to move and communicate and be healthy. And happiness hopefully is around the corner. I hope to still be a part of the National Wrestling Alliance, but let's face it, sometimes things happen, and I hope the NWA continues to like me being a part of it, because I don't think the NWA is going anywhere, and I hope they decide for me never to go anywhere. But the future hopefully is bright. I've lived long enough to realize that there is a Broadway play called Avenue Q with puppets, and there was a song in it called For Now, and basically the song is, no matter what it is, happy or sad, it's only for now. So appreciate everything you have at the given moment. If you're in a dark place, if you're feeling down, it's only for now. There's better things around the corner. Don't get trapped in that. And if you're having a hell of a time and you're like, this is fantastic, appreciate the shit out of it. Because again, it's only for now. Life's just a bunch of moments and everything else like that. I don't know what the future is going to bring. Otherwise, I'd be definitely using that to make a shit ton of money, because money doesn't buy happiness. but buying things can bring you a lot of fun. So yeah, what's the future look like? I have sun pouring down on me right now. All I know is I'm continuing to evolve as a person. My career is continuing to evolve as a career. I have friends that love me. Whatever. I am a very rich man who's doing better than he ever could have imagined. And by rich, I mean emotionally. Yeah, because screw it, wealth and all that shit comes and goes. I would love to be wealthy, but like, I have a great life, and I hope I continue to have a great life because appreciating what you have and appreciating what you didn't have and realizing that you can lose it in a minute gives you a lot of depth. And yeah, I don't know what the future is. I just hope it's slightly better than today is.
Hey, I like that attitude. Where can people check you out again in the NWA?
National Wrestling Alliance, go to our YouTube page on Tuesdays at 6:05 Eastern. We have brand new content up on a weekly basis. On pay-per-view, we are on fight.tv. Social media is at NWA. If you're looking for me, Kyle Davis. It's my legit name. I know I hate it too. Kyle Davis, ATL. That's where you're going to find that. You need tickets to an NWA event. Go to NWATIX.com. Depending on when you're listening to this, we've got NWA 75 coming up in St. Louis. 75 years of the National Wrestling Alliance. Who would have thought it? I know we did it, and I'm happy that we were wrong because we're still here kicking it live and in person whenever you go to an event. Also, we're going to have some events coming up in Chicago, depending on when you're listening to this, on July 8th and 9th. We've got a show in Boca Raton coming up July 19th. And also, the summer tour is going on. World is a Vampire, Smashing Pumpkins. Certain dates will have the National Wrestling Alliance as a part of it. You can go to smashingpumpkins.com for that information as well. But for the Armbars and Sidebars podcast, this has been Kyle Davis. Thank you for joining us. I hope to hear from you guys again, and I hope you like what you're hearing from me as well.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Until next time. Later.